Karen kicked my wheelchair for blocking the aisle. Didn't know I'm the store owner. It was just supposed to be a casual drop-in visit. I hadn't planned anything grand or public. No signs or announcements or staff meetings. Just me, rolling through the store I'd built from scratch, hopping to get a feel for how things were running without my presence hovering over everyone like a manager's shadow. There's something raw and honest about visiting your own store when no one knows you're coming. Watching how the staff interacts with customers, checking if the aisles are tidy, noticing whether the atmosphere matches the mission you put in place when you first opened the doors. My name on every paycheck, but I still like to see it from the other side. Today, I wanted to blend in, see things from the ground level, quite literally in my case. I moved slowly, quietly, not just because of the wheelchair, but because I didn't want to interrupt the natural flow. I passed through the produce section, noting a slight overstock on avocados, but otherwise everything looked well arranged. I nodded to an older couple comparing labels on 2 different oat milks. I kept rolling. I noticed one of our newer hires, Jamie, chatting near the bakery with a customer, laughing about muffins being dangerously addictive. That's the kind of vibe I wanted in this store, warm, welcoming, helpful. It wasn't just about groceries. It was about dignity. About making everyone, no matter their walk, role, or run of life, feel like they belonged. The moment happened in the frozen aisle, the place where everything suddenly turned cold, figuratively and literally. I was reviewing the signage on the new plant-based section we'd added just last month. There was a soft hum from the freezers and the usual shuffling of carts and footsteps all around. I was parked neatly to the side, reviewing a note on my phone about a supplier when she showed up, storming down the aisle like she owned it, shoulders stiff, jaw locked, and eyes narrowed as if the entire layout of the store was a personal affront to her convenience. She was exactly the kind of person Reddit would label a Karen, down to the thick bob haircut, oversized sunglasses despite being indoors, and the condescending aura of someone who thought the universe owed her VIP treatment simply for existing. She was already complaining, loudly, about how disorganized everything was, and how they used to keep the cereals at the front where you didn't have to hike a mile just to grab a box. Her cart was half full, but her entitlement was overflowing. I didn't flinch. I've seen plenty of people like her in my time, usually at a safe distance, usually through employee reports or complaint emails signed in furious cursive. But this time she got up close. Too close. She didn't just barge through the aisle. She zeroed in on me like I was the physical embodiment of all her frustrations. Maybe it was the way I sat, wheels locked and unmoving. Maybe she didn't like having her beeline to the ice cream interrupted. Maybe she thought a person in a wheelchair, minding their business and checking a phone, was a weaker target. I could feel her eyes narrow on me as she stomped closer. I looked up, gave a small, polite nod. That only seemed to fuel the fire inside her. Are you seriously just going to sit there, in the middle of the aisle? Her voice was sharp, nasal, cutting through the general buzz of the store like a siren nobody asked for. I blinked, calmly taking a second before responding. There's space to get through. I'm not blocking anything. But that wasn't enough for her. She huffed, lips tightening, and then, without any further warning, lifted her foot and kicked the wheel of my chair. Not a gentle nudge, not an accidental bump, an actual, deliberate kick with enough force to jolt me slightly sideways and knock my phone from my lap. You people are a hazard, she spat, like she'd just swatted a fly that dared land on her lunch. For a few seconds I didn't say anything. I didn't move. Neither did anyone else. The air in the aisle thickened with that charged silence you only get when something truly shocking happens, when everyone knows a line has been crossed and now they're just waiting to see what happens next. A couple 2 shelves down stopped mid-conversation. A young guy near the pizzas had his jaw slack, frozen mid-reach. Even the freezers seemed to hum a little quieter. Karen, because that's who she was now, undeniably and irrevocably, folded her arms, clearly feeling justified. You think it's okay to block people like that? This is a store, not a sidewalk. If you can't move fast like the rest of us, maybe stay out of the way. My hands slowly returned to my wheels, straightening the chair's direction. I picked up my phone without a word, wiped the screen clean on my shirt, and looked her dead in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cuss her out. I didn't give her the performance she seemed so desperate for. Instead, I smiled, just enough to be noticeable, the kind of smile that says you just messed up and don't even know it yet. "Interesting take," I said calmly, still locking eyes with her, "especially in my store." She scoffed. "Yeah, right, you don't own this place. What, you work here part-time or something?" I rolled past her without responding. The way her eyebrows scrunched up as I moved behind the checkout lanes was delicious. I could hear her muttering insults under her breath, but I wasn't focused on that anymore. I wheeled past 2 registers until I reached the end where the main control terminal sat. The cashier working the shift, Rob, if memory served, was pretending to be busy scanning items, but I could see the guilt written all over his face. He knew who she was. He knew she'd caused issues last time. And yet, he'd let her in, ignored the store-wide policy to deny service to abusive repeat customers. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, not because of the kick, not because of the insult, but because my own employee had failed to protect the store and its values. I rolled behind the register, logged into the system, and turned back to Cairn, who was now walking over with a confident smirk. "You're not really the owner," she said mockingly. "You're just one of those fake manager types they put up front to look diverse." I didn't say anything. Instead, I looked straight at Rob, who was visibly sweating now. "You let her in," I said firmly. "After last week's incident, after I told all of you no exceptions." I didn't think," he started, but I cut him off with a single raised hand. "You're done," I said. The smirk vanished from Cairn's face, replaced by confusion, then disbelief. I tapped a few keys, locked Rob out of the register system, and nodded toward the staff exit. Cairn opened her mouth to speak again, but I leaned forward just slightly. "Ma'am," I said, voice calm and unshakable, "you're about to learn just how serious I am." Cairn stood there blinking, her brain visibly trying to process the sudden shift in power. 1 second, she thought she was yelling at a nobody, a nuisance in a wheelchair clogging her path through frozen peas and self-importance. The next, she was being confronted with the reality that she'd just kicked the store owner, insulted him, and now was watching an actual firing take place right before her eyes. Her mouth opened like she wanted to speak, but the sound got lost somewhere in her throat. The confidence she had strutted in with was cracking, but not fast enough. She was the type who doubled down before she ever backed off, the type who would argue the sky was green if she thought it helped her win the moment. "You can't fire someone like that. That's illegal," she finally sputtered, trying to rally herself. "You don't even have the authority. You're just trying to scare him. And me." She turned to Rob as if expecting him to speak up, maybe support her claim and deny what had just happened. But Rob wasn't making eye contact with anyone. He was already walking toward the staff door, defeated, his shoulders slumped in that way people carry when they know they've made a mistake they can't talk their way out of. I didn't watch him leave. I'd already given him too much leniency before, too many warnings and second chances. The real issue now was standing in front of me, practically trembling with righteous outrage, and clearly still convinced she was the one being wronged here. "You assaulted someone in a wheelchair," I said evenly, keeping my voice level so every word could cut without needing volume. "In front of multiple witnesses, in a place of business." Then proceeded to berate the staff, disrupt the customers, and now you're trying to argue your way out of it like you haven't crossed every line we have. I gestured subtly to the other customers in line, a few of whom were still watching, others discreetly filming with their phones. "And you're doing all this on camera, by the way, store policy, every register, every aisle. That kick of yours is preserved in 1080p. That last part seemed to hit her square in the chest. She blinked again, a fluttering kind of panic settling into her face. "It wasn't a kick," she said quickly, the gears in her head turning, reshaping the narrative. "It was a tap, a nudge. I didn't mean anything by it. You were in the way, I just wanted to get by." I leaned slightly on the counter, not because I needed to, but to close the distance just enough that my words could land directly, without escape. You kicked me, called me a hazard, and told me to stay out of the way because I can't move fast like the rest of you. You think I haven't heard every version of that before? Every backpedal, every excuse. I narrowed my eyes. You don't get to walk into someone else's business and act like the rules don't apply to you. Her voice rose again, shrill with desperation now. You're just doing this for attention. You probably get off on it, playing the victim, acting like anyone who disagrees with you is some monster. She waved a hand at the watching customers. I'm the customer. I have rights. I was just trying to shop. What now? I'm not allowed to get groceries without being attacked. The irony of her using the word attacked was almost too rich. A man in line let out a small, bitter laugh, and Karen's eyes darted toward him, daring anyone else to join in. When no one did, she straightened up and clutched her purse tighter, like it was some kind of social armor. I want to speak to the manager, she said loudly, as if that line would still work like it did in her world of Yelp reviews and I'll ruin your business threats. You already are, I replied coolly. Owner, manager, founder, take your pick. And since you're so keen on asserting your rights, let me assert mine. You're officially banned from this store, permanently. Do not return. If you do, you'll be trespassing and the police will be involved. That's simple enough for you. She went rigid. You can't do that. I already did, I said, and then, without even looking at her, I turned to the register and tapped a few buttons, bringing up our system's incident reporting tool. I typed fast, detailed, including the time, date, and keywords. When she saw I was documenting everything, her panic deepened into fury. But still, she wasn't done. Some people never are. Karen leaned forward across the counter like she thought proximity would make her more intimidating. You're going to regret this. I have friends, connections. I'll write reviews. I'll talk to local news. I'll ruin your reputation. I smiled again. Not the polite kind. The kind that people wear when they know how empty a threat is. My reputation was built by treating people fairly and running a business where dignity matters more than dollars. Your one-star tantrum isn't going to change that. Her lips trembled, caught between another insult and the dawning realization that she was completely and publicly defeated. Still, she hesitated, as though hoping someone would swoop in and rescue her from the embarrassment she brought on herself. But no one did. In fact, the customers had now clearly chosen a side. One woman whispered to her partner, I love this store even more now. A man clapped once, then stopped, but the sentiment was loud enough without a full applause. The people watching weren't horrified by what they saw, they were relieved. Relieved that someone finally stood up to a person like her in real time. And finally, Karen backed off. She muttered something under her breath, something about lawsuits and discrimination, and how this wouldn't be the last of it. But her words were losing power with every step she took toward the exit. She reached the door, threw one last glare over her shoulder, then stormed out in a swirl of righteous defeat and ridiculous indignation. I waited a few seconds, let the tension settle like dust in the silence she left behind. Then I turned to the register, logged her ban into the system, and closed the incident report with a quiet, satisfied click. A customer came up next in line, a man in a denim jacket with 2 kids clinging to his legs. He looked at me with a grin, then nodded to the door Karen had just walked through. That was something, he said. You handled that like a pro. I smiled for real this time. She just met someone who doesn't roll over when pushed. He laughed, genuine and warm, and I began scanning his items like it was just another day at work. But deep down I knew it was. Not for her, not for me, and not for this store. The rest of the day carried on with an unusual quietness, the kind that hums just beneath the surface when people are processing what they've witnessed but don't quite know how to talk about it yet. The energy had shifted, not in a bad way. More like a shared awareness had settled into the walls of the store, as if everyone had just watched a play they weren't expecting to be part of. Some customers still came up to me as I worked behind the register, offering quiet nods or murmured compliments about how I handled the situation. Others just gave me a thumbs up or a grateful smile before checking out and heading on their way. That sort of thing lingers, those little acknowledgments. You don't realize how much a community watches until the moment you need them to, and they silently choose a side. And that day, they chose mine. I went through the motions of my usual tasks, checking inventory reports, logging an updated training policy into the employee system, reviewing footage from the store's security feed to make sure the incident was properly documented. Everything was routine, but it didn't feel routine. My muscles were tighter than usual, my breathing shallower, like I'd been holding in tension since the moment that woman's foot struck the wheel of my chair. I wasn't shaken, not exactly, but I was on edge in that way you get when you're forced to remember, yet again, that there are people out there who don't see your humanity until it collides with their entitlement. And even then, only if it inconveniences them. It was mid-afternoon when it started again, Karen's presence, I mean, not in the physical sense. She hadn't dared to come back, thankfully, but the echo of her voice started creeping back into the store through digital whispers. One of the floor managers, Lena, approached me with her tablet clutched to her chest and a strained expression. "She's posting," she said simply, and I didn't have to ask who. I followed her to the back office, logged into our social media monitoring dashboard, and there it was. A flurry of angry posts on every review platform we had, Yelp, Google, even a comment on one of our local community Facebook groups. All from Karen, all within the past hour, each one a creative reimagining of what had happened earlier that day. In her version of the story, she was the hero standing up to an aggressive staff member pretending to be disabled for sympathy. Someone who fired an innocent employee on a power trip and threatened a paying customer simply for trying to get her groceries in peace. The lies weren't even cleverly written. They were bloated with exaggeration, soaked in venom, and written with the kind of grammar that always gives away someone ranting at their kitchen table in blind fury. Still, I knew better than to ignore it. One thing I've learned over the years, both as a business owner and a disabled person in a society addicted to outrage, is that stories spread fast, even the false ones, and the truth doesn't always catch up in time unless you give it legs. I took a breath, reread a few of her wilder claims, and then clicked over to the store's official accounts. I didn't write a long defense. I didn't name her. I didn't need to. I simply posted a concise but firm statement. Earlier today, a customer was asked to leave our store following a documented incident of verbal and physical harassment toward both a staff member and another customer. We take the safety and dignity of all individuals in our store seriously, and we do not tolerate abuse of any kind. Thank you to the many patrons who support our mission of respect, inclusivity, and community. That was it. No drama, no names, just facts. But within minutes, the post had dozens of likes, a growing thread of supportive comments, and a few customers chiming in to say they witnessed the incident firsthand. One woman even wrote, "I was there. That man is the owner and she kicked his wheelchair. She got what she deserved." It was validating, not because I needed praise, but because it proved something important, that the truth mattered to the people who actually cared about what we stood for. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't go quietly, and I was right. About an hour later, a man in a cheap-looking blazer walked into the store, followed closely by Karen herself, now dressed in a new outfit and holding a large leather folder like she was going to sue a Fortune 500 company. The man came straight toward the register with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, holding out a card. "Hi, I'm Tony from Corporate Mediation Services," he said, as if that was supposed to impress me. "This customer has retained our services to file a complaint regarding alleged misconduct earlier today. We're here to discuss a resolution before things escalate further." Karen stood behind him, arms crossed, her face frozen in a smug expression like she thought bringing backup meant she'd already won. I didn't move. I didn't take his card. I just looked at him for a long moment, then shifted my gaze to her. Didn't I make it clear she's banned from this store? The man blinked. She claims you acted inappropriately and she assaulted me, I said, loudly enough for a few customers nearby to pause mid-shopping. It's all on camera. We have multiple witnesses, and now she's trespassing. His tone changed immediately, the practiced confidence draining from his voice like water down a faulty drain. Well, let's not escalate. Too late, I said, already tapping the emergency code on the store terminal that signals our private security contractor to respond to an incident. She made her choice when she returned. She's not a victim, she's a liability. Karen tried to say something then, probably another lie or self-pitying plea, but I wasn't interested in giving her more time. You brought a guy in a discount suit to threaten my store with fake mediation, I added, turning fully to her now. That's not how this works. You don't get to kick someone, lie about it online, and then parade in here like the rules don't apply to you. She turned red, not blush red, rage red, the kind of red that builds when someone finally realizes they've played every card and still lost. A moment later, security arrived, quietly but firmly escorting both her and her little hired gun out of the building. The silence she left behind was somehow louder than all the chaos she tried to bring with her. And this time, I didn't need to explain anything to anyone. The customers had seen enough. I returned to the register, the quiet hum of normalcy returning slowly. A new line was forming and the person at the front gave me a small smile. You weren't kidding, they said. You really don't play. I smiled back and scanned the first item. I don't have to, I said. The truth does it for me. By the following morning, the dust from yesterday's circus hadn't quite settled, but the store had returned to something resembling its usual rhythm. The sun had barely risen, and already the early shoppers, quiet types, the retirees and the busy parents hopping to grab a few groceries before the school run, were moving in and out with their carts. No trace of yesterday's chaos except the faint echoes lingering in the way. The staff glanced toward the door every time it opened. We all knew there was still more to come. Karen didn't strike me as the kind of person who accepted a loss gracefully. She was the type to let grudges ferment, to look for angles, to rally whatever weak resources she had and try to make a second act out of humiliation. And while I wasn't afraid of her fake mediation guy, her keyboard warrior nonsense, or her wild lies, I had to admit a part of me was tired. Tired of being forced into these battles to justify my place, to remind the world that a wheelchair doesn't come with a "kick me" sign or an invitation to disrespect. Tired of having to hold my cool while someone like her turned my dignity into an obstacle to her convenience. I sat in the office for a while that morning, going through some vendor emails and supplier updates, but I could feel the tension in the staff outside. I could hear it, too, in the soft murmurs between aisles, the occasional question whispered at the register when customers leaned in and asked, "Was that the guy from yesterday?" Or, "Is everything okay now?" Gossip is hard to contain, especially when it's viral, and Karen had made herself unforgettable. But what surprised me most wasn't that she was still a topic of conversation. It was the way people were rallying around the store. Our social media pages had lit up overnight, not with criticism or drama, but with waves of support. Dozens of people who had shopped with us for years were posting about why they kept coming back. Some told stories of how our staff had gone out of their way to help their elderly parents or their disabled kids. Others posted long thank you messages about how it felt good to walk into a business and know the people behind it stood for something. That kind of community feedback isn't something you can buy or fake. It comes from years of doing things the right way. Still, it was bittersweet that it had taken someone like Karen to make people speak up so loudly. Around midday, I decided to do another quiet lap of the store, this time not to check performance but just to be seen. Staff morale can shift fast in a storm of conflict, and I needed them to know that the backbone of the place hadn't cracked. I greeted employees one by one, gave compliments where they were due, and reminded them, casually but clearly, that we weren't going to change the way we ran things just because someone shouted loud enough. When I got to the customer service desk, I noticed something out of place. A man I didn't recognize, standing with his arms folded, staring up at the wall where we kept our Employee of the Month portraits. He looked out of place in the way people do when they're not really there to shop but pretend they are. His clothes were just a little too polished for grocery shopping, his shoes barely scuffed, his face pulled into the bored but observant expression of someone waiting for something to happen. I approached slowly and cleared my throat. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, keeping my voice polite but firm. He turned to me, glanced down at the wheelchair, and hesitated just long enough to give himself away. "Just looking," he said too quickly. Then after a beat, "Actually, I was wondering if I could speak with the owner." I smiled in that same controlled, deliberate way I'd perfected over the years. "You already are." That gave him pause. Then, like someone pressing play on a pre-recorded speech, he straightened up. "I'm a journalist, local beat. We got a tip about an incident here yesterday, and I wanted to see if anyone would be willing to give a comment." His voice had the slick polish of someone used to controlling the narrative, to shaping stories with just the right quote taken out of context. I'd dealt with his type before, reporters who weren't looking for the truth, just a headline that would stir clicks and comments. "What kind of comment?" I asked. "Well," he said, flipping open a tiny notebook like it was the 90s. "The version that's circulating online says a disabled store owner physically threatened a customer and then called in security to throw her out over a minor misunderstanding. Her family says she was traumatized by the incident and is considering legal action." "Her family," I echoed, raising an eyebrow, "or just her?" He gave a small smirk. "People talk, I go where the story is." "Well, if you're looking for a story," I said, folding my hands calmly, "maybe start with the footage, or the 6 witness statements, or the part where she kicked someone's wheelchair and called them a hazard. You're welcome to request all that through our legal department." He scribbled something in his notebook that I couldn't see, then looked up again. "So you're denying you used excessive force?" That's when I let out a low chuckle, not amused but deeply aware of how absurd the moment had become. The only thing I used was my voice and my authority as the owner of this store. If she left feeling humiliated, that's a consequence of her own behavior, not mine. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment. She broke it. End of story. The man looked mildly disappointed, like he was hoping I'd say something explosive or emotional. But I didn't give him that. I wasn't here to be anyone's clickbait. I dealt with harder battles than a woman with a bad haircut and a temper problem. After a few more awkward questions, he left. No quote worth twisting, no meltdown to capture, and certainly no scoop. I watched him go, then wheeled back toward the front of the store, feeling the weight of the moment settle into something familiar. This wasn't about one woman anymore. It was about the bigger picture. About how many times people like her walked into public spaces and expected the world to bend around their discomfort. About how often people like me were expected to stay quiet, to be polite, to turn the other cheek while someone else took liberties with our bodies and our boundaries. Well, not anymore. Back behind the register, a teen who had just started part-time last week looked at me with wide eyes. "So, is it true she might sue?" he asked nervously. I looked at him, this kid just trying to earn a few bucks and not get caught in the drama, and I gave him a calm, steady answer. "Let her," I said. "The truth isn't on her side, and we're not going to stop doing the right thing just because someone threatens us with noise." He nodded slowly, then smiled. "I think it's cool you stood up to her." I nodded back. We all did. You just don't realize how strong a place is until someone tries to break it. And with that, we got back to work. Because the store didn't run on drama or fear. It ran on community, on consistency, on showing up every day and doing the job with heart. Karen may have tried to write a different story, but we were already telling a better one together. By the end of the week, the chaos Karen had tried to stir had begun to fade like a bad smell caught in a breeze. lingering longer than it should have, sure, but never meant to last. The store had returned to its usual rhythm, the sort of comforting, mundane hum that comes from carts rolling down clean aisles, registers beeping steadily at checkout, and people moving through their day without hostility weighing down every breath. Despite all her shouting, all her threats, and that ridiculous attempt at weaponizing a local journalist, the world hadn't stopped turning. She hadn't brought the store down. She hadn't ruined me. If anything, she'd accidentally amplified what we stood for, forced people to notice the kind of place we were trying to be, and had unwittingly rallied the community in a way we could have never scripted. And in that final, ironic twist, she did more for us by trying to destroy us than she ever could have if she just kept shopping and minded her own business. I was reviewing invoices in the back office when Lena knocked and stepped in with a smile that said something was up. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She says she's Karen's daughter." At first, I thought it was a joke, some prank cooked up by staff or a customer with a twisted sense of humor, but her expression was serious, measured, and curious rather than amused. I raised an eyebrow, pushed back from the desk, and followed her out to the front. The woman waiting by the customer service desk was maybe in her early 30s, dressed in jeans and a dark blouse, her hair pulled back, eyes sharp but not unkind. She didn't look like her mother, not in the dramatic, scowling way Karen carried herself like a badge of superiority, but the resemblance was there in the jawline, in the way she stood with a certain practiced poise. When she saw me, she offered a small smile and extended her hand. "I'm Dana," she said. I wanted to come by and say something, if that's okay." I shook her hand, cautious but curious. "Go ahead." She hesitated, clearly rehearsing something in her head, then exhaled deeply. "I saw the footage. Someone sent it to me, and I read everything, the reviews, the comments, the statement your store put out. I just want to say, I'm sorry. Not that it changes anything, but I needed to say it." I studied her face, looking for any sign of insincerity, any hint of manipulation, but it wasn't there. She wasn't here to defend her mother or make excuses. She looked tired in a different way, like someone who had spent years living under the weight of someone else's bad behavior. "You don't owe me anything," I said, not unkindly but firmly. "Your mother made her choices." She nodded. "I know, but I also know how it looks, that she's tied to me, and even though I haven't spoken to her in months, the moment something like this happens, her name's back in my life again like a thunderclap. But I needed to come here not as her daughter but just as a person who saw what happened. She was wrong. She was cruel, and you didn't deserve any of it." For a moment we just stood there, and I let the quiet hang between us. Customers moved around us, oblivious, continuing their routines, but in that small corner of the store, something honest was being exchanged, something that felt like closure. I nodded slowly, accepting her words. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you probably realize." Dana smiled again, this time a little softer. "She probably doesn't even know I'm here, but if it helps, I filed a formal statement with the online platforms where she left those reviews. They'll probably be taken down. I just didn't want her poison to stick to anything you built." With that, she turned and left, her steps steady, and I watched her go, unsure if I'd ever see her again, but oddly glad that she'd come. Not because I needed her apology, but because it reminded me that even in families torn by entitlement and bitterness, there are still people trying to be better. People who recognize harm and choose to stand against it, even when that harm came from someone who raised them. The next few days passed quietly. The media attention fizzled out. The local paper never ran a story after all. Turns out when there's no scandal to sensationalize, they lose interest quickly. Karen never returned, not physically, not online, and not through any more ridiculous third parties. It was as if her tantrum had been swallowed up by the same machinery that spit her out, entitlement collapsing in on itself once it no longer got the attention it craved. The staff was calmer. The customers were warmer, and somewhere in all of it, a deeper bond had taken root, invisible but unmistakable. One afternoon, as I was finishing up for the day, One of our youngest employees, a high school senior named Mateo, approached me with a hesitant grin. He'd been shy since day one, always doing good work but rarely speaking unless spoken to. Today, though, he stood a little taller. "Hey," he said, scratching the back of his head, "I just wanted to say thanks for everything, for how you handled her, for not backing down." I smiled, tilting my head slightly. "You handled it too. You all did." He looked down, then back up, eyes full of that wide-eyed sincerity that still gives me hope for the future. "Before I started working here, I used to think people like her always won, that they could scream and get their way and no one would stop them. But you didn't let her win. You didn't let her turn this place into something ugly. You showed me you can stand up to people like that and still walk away proud." I felt something catch in my throat, a mix of pride and sadness and maybe something deeper that I hadn't let surface yet. I put a hand on the counter and nodded. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't loud. It's not flashy. It's just not moving, not giving up ground when someone tries to push you out of your own space. He nodded, smiled, then went back to stocking the shelves, and I sat there for a moment, letting the weight of it all sink in. Later that evening, I wrote a short post and pinned it to the store's social media page. No drama, no callouts, just a note of thanks. A woman called me a hazard. She kicked my wheelchair and tried to humiliate me in the middle of my own store. I didn't shout. I didn't break. I just rolled behind the register and handled it. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay steady when the world wants you shaken. Thank you to everyone who stood with us. This store belongs to the people who believe in kindness, and it always will. And that was the end of it. Cairn faded, the store thrived. And I kept rolling forward, undeterred, undefeated, and unapologetically myself.